So moving into our conversation about the profession, and actually we're going to turn to Bridget first to kick us off on the conversation about the future of the legal industry and all the change that's ahead of us because of AI. And of course, as the audience knows well, Bridget has been leading an AI transformation at the American Arbitration Association for going on 3 years now, Bridget, which is amazing and hard to believe, I'm sure. And you have talked at different times about the innovator's dilemma and the challenges of driving change within a highly successful legacy organization. So, could you kick us off and talk a little bit about the challenges and the value of growing organically versus some of the values of inorganic growth and some of the values of bringing in different components to allow you to grow in new ways?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'm most interested in hearing Jay and Ilona's reactions to all of it and advice and counsel because we're so lucky to have them. So I won't talk for too long. But and I think Jay and Ilona know some of the story. But the AAA is going to turn 100 years old in 2026, and it's a well-run business that provides dispute resolution services around the world, and a lot of them, like we do over 500,000 cases every year. So we have an awful lot of expertise. We have a lot of information that isn't really found anywhere else. And so it seemed to me, like every part of the legal profession, this one too is pretty ripe for disruption by AI. So we had to figure out what is that going to look like in an organization where most people have worked here for a few decades, which is part of why it's successful, right? Like part of why it's successful is we have these experts who have been around for a long time doing excellent work. But when you do like any legacy successful organization, it's really hard to pivot to do something that might disrupt what you're doing today, right? So that obviously is something you need a real plan for, and change management is part of that. And in my view, inorganic growth had to be part of the solution. It's not the whole solution, but it had to be part of the solution. And so I don't know, Jay, if you know the story. So the AAA did its first acquisition in 100 years last year. We acquired a little Silicon Valley startup that does online dispute resolution, which is a big term that can mean a whole lot of different things. But the point is, they were operating in a way and in a space that we were not yet operating in. And which isn't to say that the talented people I work with couldn't. Of course, they could. But by bringing in this new business, they remain actually a for-profit subsidiary of the nonprofit parent. They could operate as a tiger team in building and standing up new services for new markets. And then we could learn from each other. There would be all kinds of synergies, and we could be able to deliver some of the services and products of the future in more experimental and quick ways, right? To get like quick feedback from users in the market on those. At the same time, we were doing, a pretty significant transformation, as Jen knows, who's told the story for us beautifully, with the core team. And in my view, that's gone maybe better, faster, because we introduced, a new team with a new culture, and we were able to learn from one another and also support one another in places where each of us was not as strong. So there's a lot more I can say about it, but I know Ilona and Cleary have some experience with this as well. So I'd love to hear your take on it, Ilona.
A little bit of experience, one could say. But Bridget, I love hearing your story, and this is really only the second time I've heard you talk about it. It's so inspiring to me because it was such a great idea, right? And the idea that you are taking an organization that has done something extremely well, right? At the top of you are the best at what you do in your industry, right? And you really looked to just modernize it, right? And what I think is so interesting and important about inorganic growth is not just bringing new capabilities into an organization, but it's the opportunity to bring a whole new culture, right? A whole new way of working, a new operating system internally into an organization. And of course, once you do that, right, you are giving an opportunity for the acquiring organization to learn from that new entity and to learn the systems and the ways and the approaches of the new entities. And we can talk at length about integrations more broadly when it comes to M&A, right, and where they fail and where they do well, and what that looks like. But in my mind, and I've seen a number of integrations in my professional experience now through the different organizations that I've been with. But the integrations that are truly successful are the ones where that parent organization, the acquirer, really takes on the culture of that entity that they're acquiring, right? And they invite them in and they learn from the experience. And it seems like, from what I've heard from you, it seems like you've really done that and you've allowed that transformation to take shape pretty organically through inorganic growth. And we have certainly tried to do that with the acquisition of Springbok AI, which happened about 4 months ago, in March of this year. And the idea was really, it was a similar perspective, right? We have a craft that we do well, right? As Cleary, we have expertise across industries, across regions, but the legal profession is changing, right? That's what we're all essentially talking about here today, and that's what you and Jen, that's what both of you talk about on this podcast, right? And understanding that to be true, what is it that will help us change, right? What will help us transform? And so the vision for bringing in Springbok was really to embed data analytics into the way that we're working and help us work differently and really enhance our client service from the inside, right? From the start of the workflow to that client delivery. So it's really been an exciting journey, and it's been a fantastic integration, really, because I give a lot of credit to the firm and to our leadership team for inviting this new culture into our culture, into a culture that was already great, but recognizing that it's not that we need to change, right? But that it's that we have an opportunity to transform, which I think are two different things. And the latter, if you really get it right, I think it can really benefit from that invitation to understand and align with a new culture that's brought in.
Amazing. And Jay, you have the opportunity to have a little bit of a bird's eye view of what's happening all across the industry. What are your takeaways about combining different forces for growth? What works well? What doesn't work well? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that one of the shifts industry wide that I'm seeing that I really like is I think a change in tonality and a change in posture and attitude toward innovation and new things. I think that there is much, much broader recognition now than maybe 10, 15 years ago about the benefits and the opportunities that are afforded by new ways of thinking, welcoming new and different capabilities into the organization. And I'll take us back quite a bit to my time at Seyfarth. And Seyfarth was very early in doing a lot of this thinking, and Seyfarth had subsidiaries in adjacent businesses. So Seyfarth Shot Work was quite an older business, actually. I think they had started that in the late 90s, and it was a training arm, which made a lot of sense with the employee relations and labor and employment practice group of the firm. And then Seyfarth Lean Consulting, which was ahead of its time, really, because it was designed to help corporate clients kind of make the jump to digital business and different ways to engage with their providers, as well as service model innovation for the firm proper. So I think when I think back to some of the work, the culture work and the communications work that I did with Steve Poor, I was so lucky to learn from his years of experience and his wisdom. The respect for what exists, I think it's very important that the innovators bring that to the table. And I think it is really a new idea in the world, because if you go back through the intellectual history of innovation, like the older idea, like from the 1940s, is creative destruction, right? That's what Schumpeter called innovation, that new things were always going to happen in the world and that it would destroy or displace old things. And I think that's an adversarial dynamic that maybe, got scaled through the sassy magic of Silicon Valley and all this talk of like moving fast and breaking things, right? I never thought that was appropriate for the law. we are talking about law firms that really created the regulatory legal framework of this country. There are firms here that are older than these United States. And there are firms that, kind of lay claim to really important legal innovations like the holding company, you know, uh, like the bankruptcy practice, like the trust indenture. There are lawyers and law firms that help build all of that out, right? So I think the people trying to improve the practice of law really have to come in with some recognition of what has happened in the last, not just 100 years, 150 years, 200 years. But it's also that the people who have been there doing amazing work understand that new and different capabilities are sometimes they are necessary and sometimes they are transformative in how the firm can dispose or discharge its core purpose. And then so turning everyone's attention to why does the organization exist? Who are we serving? What are we meant to do? Like, what are we all trying to do here? And what are the best available ways for us to do that? What does, a new acquisition or a new group or a new capability, how does that change our ability to create value for our stakeholders, for our clients? And I think kind of giving people a shared purpose is super important. And now I think, that innovation has certainly moved up market. There are many people in innovation leadership roles at some of the most profitable, oldest, whitest of white shoe firms here in New York and certainly in London also. I think that culture work is much, much further along than, what I saw in the industry 15 years ago. In terms of acquisitions, I think that the strategy part of it needs more thinking, though. I think that, you know, it's not just an emotional, cultural distinction, whether you're trying to displace, the way things are done or to enhance them or to create entirely new ways of doing old things, or are you going to try to do new things, new value propositions that you haven't attacked before, right? I think there are strategy implications as to whether you're going after hours displacement or, kind of outcome enhancement for the client or creating new service lines, new service delivery models for existing revenue streams. Or are you trying to open up new revenue streams to address new needs that you haven't served before? I think that level of strategic thinking seems to be lagging some of the investments, which is not surprising. But I think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see, a lot of old established legal businesses really lean into that thinking about how do we monetize these investments? How do we reach that, not only problem solution fit, but product market fit, right? Who are we trying to serve with what offering? So I think that's probably what's coming next.
So this is a sort of like stemming from advice that you gave me as a solopreneur, but at scale. So you told me when I started a business, you said people will tell you you need to focus and don't be swayed by that. Experiment and see what you enjoy doing and also what is profitable. Do you think law firms need to focus on one of those different strategies that you mentioned, or can they experiment with different things and try to do many things at once?
Amazing question.
I was just thinking it's such a good question.
So I'm going to start just as a joke with everyone's favorite lawyerly answer is it depends, but I will follow up. I think that I think it's an iterative process. So, where I think firms need a focused lens first is understanding their current assets and liabilities. And I mean strategic assets, strategic liabilities. And the reason I think that is more important for them than you and me, Jen, when we were solopreneurs or, like founders or entrepreneurs starting new things is that they are encumbered by an entire kind of history of accumulated choices. They do have a lot of stakeholders in the, it's not just a business. Absolutely. Some of these most profitable firms in the world, they already run like businesses. Like the idea that they don't, I reject that entirely, but they're also social and political entities with a lot of stakeholders who have a lot of stake in the system, right? So I think that it's important for them to take stock of their current position. Where are they strong? Where could they be better? where could they maybe kind of, pull back past investments and redirect that to, new directions. I think the focus mindset has to start with where they are now, the organization's current reality. I think when it comes to the organization's future aspirations, it's extremely important for leaders to help people switch their mental context, the emotional context, to exploration so that people can learn about emergent horizons, new possibilities, and like create new thinking, new framing, new ideas, right? Because what's the Einstein quote? Like, we can't solve problems with the same mindset like we had when we created them, right? If you want people to be innovative, if you want people to have new ideas, sometimes you have to take them out of the office, put them in a new physical space, even for a day. You have to expose them to new ideas and new stimulus, right? So I think in that opportunity scanning is really important to be exploratory. But the synthesis of the two, I think, is immensely important because the question really becomes, what are the new possibilities where we are better positioned than other organizations to, go after those, right? Because opportunity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, you really do have to take a discipline focused lens to what your assets and advantages are, and then evaluate the whole, kind of universe of possibilities as against that lens, right? Which are the right best opportunities for us that we really can't miss? Like, we have to take a swing. Which opportunities might be a reach, and which are truly distractions that are going to really hurt our chances of succeeding at these other things where we are well positioned, where the strategic advantages are mission critical to our future advantage.
I love all of that. And I just, as you were talking, Jay, I was thinking about how important it is to think about the value proposition of what we're delivering, right? Jen, I think I heard you say this first, that the law as an operating system has not had a refresh in quite a long time, right? And one of my favorite quotes, I think it was an Ethan Hawke. It was a TED talk, and it was about how, creativity is not a luxury, it's actually sustenance. And it's a beautiful TED talk. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. But I think it's the same now for our profession, right? And for firms who are looking to stay ahead of the curve and ahead of, the changing industry. We need to understand, what is it that our clients are doing? How are they working? How does that inform our delivery model? Because exactly to Jay's point, right, nothing exists in a vacuum. And so when we're thinking about delivering value, it has to be derived from, what is our best and highest form of advisory? And what does that advisory look like? And it probably won't look the same as, or it ought to not look the same as it's looked, right, for the last number of decades, because we don't have that sort of long form attention anymore, right? People don't want to read 40-page memos. People want data visualizations. They want interactivity, right? They want, immediate sort of accessibility of bullet point information. And that's a very different delivery model than what we've been used to in the legal profession. And that takes different tools. It takes a refreshed workflow, right? It takes a different type of training. Maybe the pricing model is different, right? Maybe there's tech on the front end. I certainly hope there's tech on the back end, right? But all of this means that the way that we're doing it is different. And I think the really exciting piece right now is figuring out what that different means, and what are its component parts, and is it modularized, and how do you assemble it, and how do you make it, fit for purpose across your practices and your regions so that it best serves your client.
I mean, you guys are all experts in this, but the barriers to doing all of that for busy lawyers are, I mean, they're infinity, right? Lawyers are too busy to make time for that. They're trained to think that they can't experiment with creativity, right? That's actually part of the training, the part of what they're taught. They're doing quite well right now, right? That even though everybody's been talking about how law is ripe for disruption with AI, it looks like profits are okay in the big firms, right? So they're doing, so there's a reason for them to be skeptical, and there's lots of reasons for them not to make time or space for the kinds of work you two are suggesting they need to do. Are you seeing them do it? Like, is anything changing yet? Or do you think this is all still to come, and there'll be, some wake up calls that force it?
I can kick us off maybe, and just with a very short snippet, without giving away too much. I'm starting to see it change. I don't think there's a sea change just yet, but it is, I'll say, as an innovation leader, as someone who's focused on this is very much something that I'm thinking about constantly. And this is this is the vision state, right? This is on the vision board in terms of what we're doing and what we're setting up for so that we can deliver differently. It's the why. And even if it's not fully here yet, right, that is what we're driving towards.
Some of it is going to be depressing. I think I think it depends who you mean by they. Like, who is they, right? And there's a lot of ethos that goes into innovation forums, and the kind of people who dedicate their entire lives to innovation. I think they do bring very strong ethos to the challenge. But I think when you look at markets, the pace of adoption of innovations is quite practical. I think that commercial enterprises adopt innovations when it makes financial sense to do so. And then, so I think that pockets of the industry have been under greater financial pressure in terms of rates, pricing, margins. They went first. I think we can clearly see that in some of the ways that service models have changed for legal work that I would say is like core minus, closer to commoditization. I think you certainly see that, if you go back to the dot-com bubble, like right after the dot-com bubble, offshoring was kind of centers like in lower cost regions of the world. That was very new, and that's standard practice now, I think, for global organizations. If you look at some of the back end processes that go into ESI handling, that was very new. And we had to have the Sedona conference, and we had to have lawyers, some lawyers, very few lawyers, focus really hard on that, right? And then once they figured out a scalable methodology, businesses just sprang into being. And those founders ran very hard to make e-discovery a huge segment. LPO's the same, ALSP's the same. A lot of the work that you see in contracting. Now, does that affect the ivory tower profitability of some of the oldest firms in the world? Not yet. But and I think here's where like Christensen's model of the innovator's dilemma, it always holds true, right? Innovation does start in the lower end of the market, and then it does move up market. I think we're seeing that up market move right now. And as somebody who paid for college being a secretary and litigation paralegal, I remember I am somebody who has physically bait stamped, evidence. So I know that change does happen in legal practice. It may be, though, and this is the depressing part, when change is broadly adopted finally by the majority of the market, it's no longer exciting because all the novelty has worn off, and the people who had the idea, people who believed in it when it was new, they're like so worn down by the change management battles that the light has just gone out of their eyes. But, that's the nature of change, right? Like, new things are thrilling, but not all the thrills are good. And then by the time everything feels safe enough to adopt, it's not exciting anymore. And then so I think there is that kind of hype curve has an emotional arc to it, right? And then so and now I'm gonna go back to your actual question, like who should be doing that work? I think it is not fair to ask, associates who have like, 1,800, 2,000, 2,200 billable hour requirements to explore in a vacuum in a directionless way. I think that is, facially nonsense, right? They can't. I think that's why it's so important for leaders to create like parameters, create spaces so that people can have mental space, emotional space, and be in the right headspace for exploration. That's why I think programs are really important. I think that's why the correct, and I say correct because there are correct and incorrect configurations for innovation. I think choosing the right configuration is really important to maintain today's success and to invest in tomorrow's success, right? So culture, investment, programming, operations, infrastructure. Like, I think these are all of the components of innovation leadership, and it doesn't rest just with people like me who are consultants who give advice, or founders who are creating new things, as I am doing now. And it doesn't rest with people like Ilona, who is, inside the organization driving that change. Ultimate accountability rests with the chairs, the managing partners, the chief operating officers, because they are accountable for how the resources are allocated today. So I think they really need to lean into the challenge of evaluating ideas that they can get from many places, and then, creating the configuration that works.